the human body has 206 bones. In the right conditions, they can take decades to decay. In the wrong conditions, just minutes to disappear. Flesh, muscle, tendons, all reduced to nothing but fragments, scattered across a predator's den. And when police arrived at the lavish estate of Isabella Moretti, that's all they found. Lorenzo Moretti was a man who had everything: power, wealth, an empire built on blood and silence. He moved through the underworld untouched, feared by criminals and law enforcement alike. He was untouchable. Indestructible. Until the night he vanished without a trace. His wife, Isabella, had spent years building her empire with an iron grip, crushing anyone who stood in her way. To betray her was unthinkable. To humiliate her was unforgivable. And yet, Lorenzo made the mistake of a lifetime. One that sealed his fate in the most brutal way imaginable. What happens when a queen is betrayed by her own king? And what price must be paid when that betrayal comes from inside her own home? Tonight, we unravel the case that left even the most hardened investigators speechless. The case of Isabella Moretti, the woman who turned revenge into an art form, and her husband into nothing but a memory. A crime queen who ruled with fear. A husband hiding a deadly secret. And a night of passion that ended in the most unimaginable execution. To understand the brutal fate of Lorenzo Moretti, you have to understand the woman he married. A woman who built an empire not through diplomacy or deception, but through pure, unrelenting terror. Isabella Moretti wasn't just a mafia wife. She wasn't a partner in crime. She was the crime. She was born into violence. Raised in it. Shaped by it. The daughter of Salvatore Moretti, a Sicilian drug kingpin who turned the Brazilian underworld into his personal chessboard. Her mother. The heiress to a cartel so powerful that even the police knew better than to interfere. Together, they ruled an empire built on blood, money, and fear. And their only daughter, Isabella, was their most prized possession. By the time she was 13, she had witnessed her first execution. A traitor, kneeling before her father, begging for mercy. There was none. A gunshot rang out. Blood splattered onto her dress. She didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. By 18, she wasn't just learning the business, she was running it. Commanding men twice her age. Ordering hits. Making deals. And she did it all without a shred of hesitation. While other mafia daughters were hidden away in mansions, shielded from the violence, Isabella was the violence. How she earned the name La Reina. In the criminal underworld, respect isn't given. It's taken. And Isabella took it the only way she knew how, through blood. The moment the world started calling her La Reina wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. A rival cartel leader had crossed a line. Stolen from her. Dismissed her as just another woman playing a dangerous game. So she made an example of him. In a broadcast seen by thousands, she had him executed live. A bullet to the head. A warning to everyone who dared to question her rule. After that, she wasn't Isabella Moretti anymore. She was La Reina. The Queen. And for those who thought death was too quick, too merciful, there was Dante. Some drug lords had bodyguards. Some had trained assassins. Isabella had Dante, a 600-pound lion, raised in captivity, fed on live prey, trained to kill. He wasn't a pet. He was a weapon. A punishment. A message to anyone who dared to betray her. And when people spoke her name, it wasn't just fear they felt, it was something much worse. Because in her world, there were fates far worse than death. This is the woman Lorenzo Moretti married. The woman he thought he could deceive. The woman he believed he could control. And when she discovered the truth, there was no escape. Every empire needs an alliance. Every throne, a king. And for Isabella Moretti, there was only one man in the world powerful enough to stand beside her, Lorenzo Moretti. The Ghost. The man who could move entire shipments of cocaine across continents without leaving a trace. A shadow in the underworld. A myth whispered in cartel meetings. A man so untouchable, so feared, they called him El Fantasma, the Ghost. This wasn't love. It was strategy. Isabella had the muscle. The connections. The assassins willing to die for her. But Lorenzo? He had the most valuable asset of all, international drug routes. He was the key to global expansion, a direct pipeline into European and Middle Eastern markets. With his networks and her enforcers, they became unstoppable. A power couple unlike any the cartel world had ever seen. Together, they ruled an empire worth billions. They dined with politicians, bribed law enforcement, and held the fates of entire cities in their hands. They weren't just husband and wife. They were a kingdom. A dynasty. And in a world where trust meant everything, their marriage was supposed to be ironclad. Unbreakable. Except Lorenzo was keeping a secret. One that could cost him his life. In the underworld, there is no room for weakness. No tolerance for anything that strays from the image of absolute dominance. And for Lorenzo, there was no greater risk than the truth about his desires. Because despite the power, the reputation, the ruthless efficiency with which he ran his business, he was living a double life. To the world, he was a king. A conqueror. A husband. But behind closed doors, in the deepest, most forbidden corners of his life, Lorenzo Moretti was a man with secrets. Affairs hidden in the darkest hours of the night. Encounters that could never be spoken of. Desires that, if discovered, would mean his execution. For years, he played the role perfectly. The devoted husband. The untouchable crime lord. The loyal partner to Reina. He mastered deception, buried his truth so deep even his closest allies never suspected. In the world of the Mafia, any sign of softness, of vulnerability, was a death sentence. And for Lorenzo, the risk wasn't just exposure. It was the one person in the world he couldn't afford to betray. His wife. Because Isabella Moretti didn't share power. She didn't forgive disloyalty. And if she ever found out the truth, Lorenzo wouldn't just lose his empire. He'd lose everything. There are betrayals that shatter trust. And then there are betrayals that annihilate entire empires. For Isabella Moretti, loyalty was sacred. A single whisper of deception could mean death. So when she began to suspect her husband, when the unthinkable truth started revealing itself, there was no going back. The walls of her kingdom were about to come crashing down, and at the center of it all, was the one betrayal she could never forgive. Alessio and Matteo Moretti were born into royalty. The twin sons of Reina and El Fantasma. From the moment they could walk, they were taught one thing above all else, obedience. To the family. To the empire. And most of all, to their mother. They worshipped her. Feared her. From an early age, they understood that love in their family was earned, not given. That mistakes weren't forgiven. And that one wrong move could make them disposable. But if Isabella was their queen, Lorenzo was their god. A father who, unlike their mother, showed them glimpses of warmth. Of favoritism. Of something deeper. At first, it was nothing more than whispers. Questions Isabella dismissed. After all, Lorenzo had always been a man of secrets. A ghost, even in his own home. But then, the gifts became excessive. The meetings more frequent. The glances too long, too lingering. And Isabella's instincts, sharpened by years of betrayal and survival, told her something wasn't right. The first clue came in the form of a message. A notification that appeared on Lorenzo's encrypted phone, a device even she wasn't allowed to touch. But in their world, no secret stayed buried forever. And when she finally cracked the code, the truth spilled out like poison. What she read made her blood run cold. Her husband. Her sons. A relationship that defied every law of family, of loyalty, of morality. A bond that was more than fatherly. More than anything that should have existed between them. And in that moment, Isabella Moretti, the most feared woman in the underworld, felt something she had never felt before. Rage. The kind that didn't just demand blood. It demanded destruction. But the messages weren't enough. Isabella needed proof. Needed to see with her own eyes what had been happening under her roof. So she set the trap. A hidden camera. A night she knew Lorenzo would be alone. And when she finally pressed play, when she saw the betrayal unfold before her own eyes, there was no doubt left. Her husband. In her home. In her bed. With their sons. There are two kinds of rage. The kind that burns hot, violent, impulsive, reckless. And then there's the kind that chills the blood, that moves in silence, calculating, waiting. For Isabella Moretti, there was no screaming, no frantic accusations. She didn't throw glasses or demand explanations. Instead, she planned. Every detail. Every second. Every breath leading to the moment Lorenzo Moretti would take his last. The invitation was simple. A family dinner. No arguments. No warnings. Just a quiet request, a single phrase that sealed Lorenzo's fate: we need to talk. Lorenzo Moretti had many enemies. He had spent a lifetime avoiding death, slipping through the fingers of law enforcement, dodging assassins hired by rival cartels. But the enemy who would destroy him wasn't waiting outside his gates. She was standing in front of him, dressed in silk, holding his favorite wine. Alessio and Matteo were no fools. They had grown up in a world where death could come in the middle of the night, where a simple misstep could mean an unmarked grave. And that night, something felt wrong. Their mother's voice too calm. Her movements too measured. The way her fingers tapped lightly against the glass, counting the seconds. Waiting. The drug didn't work instantly. That would have been too easy. Too merciful. Isabella wanted him to feel it. To realize, in those last moments, that she had outplayed him. That he wasn't El Fantasma anymore. That he wasn't untouchable. That, in the end, his greatest mistake wasn't his enemies. It was underestimating his wife. At first, it was subtle. A heaviness in his limbs. A slight fog settling over his thoughts. But then, the real horror set in. The way his vision blurred, the way his own body betrayed him, turning slow, weak. He tried to speak, to move. But his tongue felt thick. His arms, leaden. The room tilted. And across the table, Isabella Moretti just watched. The twins said nothing. Did nothing. Because deep down, they understood. Their mother wasn't just killing a man. She was sending a message. A message that, in this world, betrayal is not forgiven. Not even by blood. No one knows exactly what Isabella said in those final moments. Some say it was a confession, that she told him she had known for weeks. Others claim she whispered a single question: was it worth it? But whatever was said, it was the last thing Lorenzo Moretti ever heard. And just like that, El Fantasma was gone. The man who had built an empire. The man who had slipped through death's grip more times than anyone could count. In the end, he didn't die in a hail of gunfire. He didn't die at the hands of his enemies. He died exactly as he had lived, surrounded by power, but utterly alone. For a man who had always been in control, waking up in the unknown must have been disorienting. The last thing Lorenzo Moretti remembered was the dinner table, the smooth taste of wine on his tongue, and then, nothing. Now, the cold floor pressed against his cheek. His body felt sluggish. And something wasn't right. The moment clarity returned, so did the fear. This wasn't a prison. This wasn't a basement. This was the lion's den. Alessio and Matteo were standing outside the cage. Their expressions couldn't be more different. Alessio, his hands trembling, his eyes red-rimmed. Matteo, silent, still, his gaze locked on the man who had been their father. They had been dragged from their rooms in the dead of night. No explanations. No warnings. Just the cold hands of their mother's men, leading them to the underground chamber they had only heard whispers about. The place where Isabella Moretti settled debts no man could repay. For years, Isabella Moretti had been the architect of death. She decided who lived, who disappeared, who was erased from existence. But this? This was different. This wasn't business. This was personal. You liked being devoured, didn't you? Isabella asked her husband. Let's see if you enjoy it now. She says. Dante had been Isabella's favorite since the moment she was gifted him as a cub. He had been raised on raw meat, trained to attack on command. And tonight, he wouldn't need any encouragement. Isabella, please, but Isabella. She simply tilts her head. Watches. Dante moves slowly, circling. He is in no rush. He has done this before. He understands the ritual of the kill. The chase. The fear. Then, suddenly, he lunges. The first bite was to the leg. Teeth sinking into flesh. The sound, a sickening crunch, the tearing of muscle. Lorenzo screamed, his body jerking violently. But there was nowhere to go. No escape. And Isabella watched it all. Lorenzo Moretti's screams didn't last long. The human body can only endure so much before it gives in. Before the pain fades. Before death welcomes it. Lorenzo Moretti had built his empire through fear. But in the end, it was fear that devoured him. Piece by piece. Isabella Moretti had spent her entire life perfecting the art of deception. She knew that in the world of crime, a single mistake could mean death. And after what she had done to her husband, there was no room for mistakes. The moment Lorenzo took his last breath, Isabella went into cleanup mode. Every trace of his existence had to be erased. The blood, any blood spatter near the cage was washed down with high-pressure hoses. Industrial-strength bleach was poured over the area to destroy DNA evidence. The clothes, Lorenzo's blood-stained shirt and shoes were burned in an underground incinerator. His wedding ring melted down into a gold bar. The teeth and bones, Dante, the lion, had done most of the work. But any larger bones that remained were crushed into dust and disposed of in the estate's underground septic system. By the time dawn broke, there was no body. No blood. No sign that Lorenzo Moretti had ever stood inside that cage. There was still one problem. Witnesses. The twins had seen everything. So had the mansion staff. And in Isabella's world, loose ends were unacceptable. The mansion staff disappears. Hours after the execution, every servant, cook, and guard who had been present that night was either sent away, or silenced. Bribes and threats, the highest paid staff were given money to disappear. Those who couldn't be bought were given an ultimatum: leave, or be buried. The twins' loyalty test, Alessio and Matteo were forced to swear an oath of silence. Isabella looked them both in the eye and made her expectations clear. Isabella. Family first. Always. Say it. To the outside world, Lorenzo Moretti's disappearance needed an explanation. And Isabella had one ready. Official statement, read by the Moretti family lawyer. Lorenzo Moretti has gone into hiding due to security threats against our family. He is safe but will remain in an undisclosed location until further notice. Isabella even had a fake letter drafted in Lorenzo's handwriting, claiming he had fled to Argentina to escape assassination attempts. Fake sightings were planted across South America. Whispers were spread. And for a while, people believed them. Lorenzo Moretti had spent years encrypting his messages. But Isabella had one of the best cybercriminals in Brazil on her payroll. Encrypted messages were wiped from Lorenzo's private phone. Security footage from the mansion was destroyed. His personal accounts were drained and rerouted to offshore banks. Any digital trace of Lorenzo Moretti was erased. It was as if he had never existed. But even the cleanest cover-ups have weak spots. One of them was Rafael Castillo, Isabella's former enforcer. Castillo had helped dispose of Lorenzo's remains. He knew too much. He was supposed to disappear. But he survived. He fled before Isabella could get to him. And in the end, he would be the one to bring her empire crashing down. For months, Isabella Moretti believed she had done the impossible. She had erased a man from existence. She had silenced every voice that could betray her. She had covered her tracks so well that even the police were fooled. But no crime stays buried forever. It wasn't just Lorenzo Moretti's sudden disappearance that raised suspicions. It was the whispers. The mansion staff vanishing overnight. The quiet disposal of furniture. The freshly poured concrete in the basement. But the true breakthrough? That came from an unexpected source. For months, Rafael Castillo had been hiding. He knew Isabella was hunting him. He knew the moment he was found, he'd be dead. So he did the only thing he could, he ran. And in his possession? A secret recording that would finally expose the truth. Castillo went to the police and gave himself up as that was the only way he could think of to be safe from his boss. Castillo told the police that she didn't just kill him. She made it a show. She wanted him to suffer. The recording taken the night of Lorenzo's execution, from a hidden device inside the Moretti mansion, captures Isabella's voice, cold, emotionless, as her husband screams for his life. The unmistakable sound of Dante's growls and bones breaking. And finally, laughter. Lorenzo, screaming, "Isabella, please. You don't have to do this." Isabella, calmly, "You liked being devoured, didn't you? Let's see if you enjoy it now." Lorenzo, "Please, don't do this." Isabella, "You should have been more careful, mi amor. Now, Dante is hungry." Then, the lions roar. The sound of flesh tearing. And over it all, Isabella's chilling, quiet laughter. The moment investigators heard the recording, they knew. This was no cartel hit. No rival attack. This was a wife's vengeance, meticulously planned and brutally executed. For months, Isabella Moretti's plan had worked. The world believed her husband had vanished into thin air. The cartel had moved on. The police had no body, no evidence, all they had was the recording, and that was not enough to get her. But then, an unexpected discovery changed everything. A wildlife inspector had been assigned to monitor the health of exotic animals kept in private estates. Dante, Isabella's prized lion, was one of them. During a routine examination of the lion's waist, the inspector found something that didn't belong there: fragments of human teeth. At first, authorities assumed the remains belonged to an unfortunate victim fed to the lion years before. After all, Isabella had a history of using Dante for executions. But when forensic testing was conducted, the results sent shockwaves through the department. DNA confirmed it wasn't just any victim, it was Lorenzo Moretti. He hadn't fled to Argentina. He hadn't been assassinated by rivals. He had been eaten. For months, the twins had stayed silent. They knew what had happened. They had watched it unfold. But when the truth began unraveling, only one of them cracked. Matteo remained stone-faced, denying everything. Alessio couldn't handle it. During a routine police stop for an unrelated charge, Alessio broke down and made a chilling confession. Alessio, crying, she made And with that single word, the dam broke. The truth was out. And Isabella Moretti's reign of terror was finally coming to an end. Alessio Moretti was just 19. The youngest son of a drug empire. And the moment he was separated from his mother, the walls began to crack. Detective, Alessio. We know what happened. We just need to hear it from you. Alessio, she made us watch. With the evidence mounting, Isabella Moretti was arrested. The queen of the cartel, the most feared woman in Brazil, finally behind bars. But was this the end of her reign? Or just another calculated move? For years, Isabella Moretti had ruled with absolute power. She had outsmarted rivals, silenced enemies, and struck fear into the hearts of even the most ruthless cartel leaders. But on the morning of July 18, 2023, that power came crashing down. Authorities acted fast, armed with forensic evidence, the secret recording, the DNA from the teeth and Alessio's confession. Isabella's estate was impenetrable, surrounded by armed guards, reinforced steel gates, and security cameras. The government feared a bloodbath, but they underestimated one thing: Isabella never expected a betrayal from within. Her private security, men who had killed for her, died for her, had already been bought off. Her most trusted advisor, Gabriel Ruiz, had given her up in exchange for immunity. When federal agents stormed the gates, there was no resistance. No gunfire. No war. She was found in her bedroom, completely composed. No escape. No weapons. Just her and her infamous pet lion, Dante, lounging beside her. As officers breached the room, she did not scream. She did not run. She simply stared at them, cold, expressionless. Officer, gun raised. Isabella Moretti, you are under arrest. Isabella, calmly. I was wondering when you'd come. She did not resist. She did not beg. As they handcuffed her, she only gave one final command in Portuguese. Isabella. Deixa-o ir, let him go. Before officers could react, her lion, Dante, was released from his cage. The room erupted into chaos, officers scrambling, gunshots firing, the deafening roar of the beast. The final message was clear: if she was going down, she wasn't going alone. Animal control was at alert and everything was put under control after almost 2 hours of heat. Matteo, the second twin, was brought in for questioning. Your brother is talking, Matteo. If you want a deal, now's the time. Matteo tilts his head. A long pause. Then, a smirk. Matteo. I don't need a deal. My mother will walk out of this free. 2 brothers. 2 different responses. One cracked under pressure. The other? Loyal to the end. For the first time, the most feared woman in the Mafia was powerless. The charges against her: murder, organized crime, obstruction of justice, and dozens of others. This was not just any trial. This was a reckoning. A moment where the world held its breath to see if one of the most feared women in modern crime would finally meet her fate. But in the world of the Mafia, justice is never straightforward. The prosecution's key witnesses. Isabella's own sons. Matteo and Alessio, once inseparable, now stood on opposite sides of the courtroom. Matteo never testified. He refused to speak a word against her. Alessio became the prosecution's key witness, his testimony shook the world. The jury listened to the secret recording, the moment Lorenzo Moretti was fed to a lion. Alessio, voice trembling. She's a monster. She made us watch. And she enjoyed it. The jury watches in stunned silence as Alessio recounts the night of Lorenzo Moretti's murder in harrowing detail. The screams. The smell of blood. The way Isabella never flinched. Then came Matteo, his mother's most loyal son. Unlike Alessio, he refused to break. Matteo, calmly. She did what had to be done. My father was a traitor. In our world, there is only one punishment for betrayal. Gasps ripple through the courtroom. Even the judge leans forward, momentarily stunned. Matteo wasn't here to bring his mother down. He was here to defend her. To the horror of prosecutors, Matteo framed the killing as a necessary act, a mafia justice. This was supposed to be an airtight case. But the moment Isabella was arrested, something strange began happening. Key witnesses disappeared. Some fled. Others? Never seen again. Bribes flowed through legal channels like a silent current. One by one, those who could bury Isabella Moretti, vanished. A forensic analyst went missing before testifying. A cartel informant recanted his entire statement. It wasn't just a trial. It was a war behind closed doors. The question wasn't just whether Isabella was guilty, but whether anyone would dare convict her. 6 months of testimony. Over 100 witnesses. A global audience hanging on to every word. And then, after weeks of deliberation, the jury returned. Judge, firmly. On the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. Isabella Moretti, the queen of crime, was sentenced to life in prison. No parole. No special treatment. Her empire, stripped. Even after the bribes and most key witnesses disappearing. She turns, and smiles. But was this truly the end? Or was this just another move in a much larger game? Alessio Moretti, given witness protection. Rumored to be living under a new identity, cut off from his past. Matteo Moretti, vanished. Some believe he fled to South America. Others whisper that he is quietly rebuilding his mother's empire. Dante the lion, seized by authorities. Sent to a wildlife sanctuary. His reign of terror, over. Isabella Moretti, serving life in a maximum security prison. Yet even behind bars, whispers say she still holds power. Some criminals disappear. Some are forgotten. But Isabella Moretti? She was never just a criminal. She was a legend. And legends never die. Do you think justice was truly served? Or does Isabella Moretti still hold more power than we realize? Drop your theories in the comments, let's break this case wide open. If you love true crime stories that dig deep into the truth, hit that subscribe button. More shocking cases are coming soon.